So instead of reading this whole thing, we're actually going to just copy a lot of the code and talk about what it does. So the first thing they tell you to do is to give your whole page a background. Paint your gallery wall. Now, they want you to do this for Google Coder projects again, but we're only going to do it for Cloud9. So literally just come down here. Don't worry about reading any of it. Just copy this little bit of CSS right here. You can go ahead and read that if you would like. Some of them I'll tell you to read, some of them I won't. But right here, we're going to take a little bit of CSS. I'm going to click right click or command click on a Mac and copy it. Then I'm going to come back to Cloud9, go to my style.css file, and I'm going to paste this CSS code in right here. And as soon as I save it and refresh this page, I should see a gray background. And there it is. My background is now slightly gray, and I'm going to go back into my index.html file and get rid of my h1 hey, and it's gone. I'm going to give myself a little more space here and make sure that we can see the whole page. Lovely. Okay, so now we are about ready. If, for instance, your body and HTML style do not appear on your page, it means you have a problem linking your CSS, so pay attention there. Now you'll notice in this CSS, it starts with a body tag and an HTML tag, but in between them it has a comma. All that comma means is that whatever rule I'm writing here applies to both the body and to the HTML. That's all you need to know. And this background color right here is a hex code for F6, 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 which is basically almost white. It's just a tiny bit gray. So if you save this, you should have something that looks like this, and we should be ready to go. So back in the Google Mondrian project, we're going to continue on to step 2. Right here where it says step 2, hang your canvas, I want you to go ahead and read a little bit from right here to here. Read as much of it as you can in the next minute or so, and then we're going to talk about it. So now that we have our little drywall-like gray background, we're going to start to do a little bit of box model theory. I really like these projects because they do a great job of illustrating how every web page on the internet is just composed of a bunch of boxes put together and styled to create the appropriate appearance that we want for our web page. We're going to be making a ton of boxes in this little walkthrough, and you can see right here we're starting with our first box, this big box right here that kind of looks like a sticky note. This is going to hold everything on our painting. This is basically called our canvas. And so in this walkthrough, we're going to start making boxes with different styles. And the first example of that you can see right here. So I'm actually going to copy all of this CSS and go ahead and paste it into my style.css file. And then we're going to talk about what it does really quickly, okay? So take this whole thing, right click, copy, or press Control-C or Command-C on a Mac. Copy all of it and paste it into your style.css file right down here. When you do this, nothing is going to change yet, and there's a good reason for that. So, yeah, exactly. We haven't given the style to anything yet. You'll notice though that we're not just saying body or HTML. What are we selecting here with our selector? Hashtag painting. Now, in HTML and CSS, whenever we want to specify a CSS rule with a hashtag, it means we're referring to an ID. A hashtag means ID. So back in your index.html file, you can create a div, the divider element, and give it an ID attribute, set it equal to painting. And the second you do that, you'll see your painting canvas appear right on your screen. Now, there's a lot of things at play here, so I'm going to talk about them piece by piece, okay? And yours might look a little different because mine's pretty zoomed in here. But essentially, this is what we're working with. So I'm going to save both these files. Now let's talk about the style.css file you see right here, okay? The first thing you'll notice is the background color. This background color is a hex color, hashtag FFF4DB. What color does that stand for? Yeah, yellow. Kind of looks like a, sort of like an off yellow. Looks like a post-it note. And this is only being applied to the div with an ID of painting. So only this div is getting this style. Now, be careful when you give things IDs, because you can only give one ID to one unique HTML element. So in our style.css file, when we specify that div by putting hashtag painting, it's going to give only that div a background color of this off yellow. Now the reason why this div is so big is because we gave it a specific width of 400 pixels and a specific height of 400 pixels. No matter what size our screen, it's always going to be 400 pixels wide and 400 pixels tall. Pay careful attention to these dimensions because they're going to be very important when we start talking about laying out our painting inside of this div. Now we also have 3 different margin settings here. What are they? That's right. Margin top, which pushes this div 30 pixels away from the top. And a margin left of auto and auto. So, I mean margin left and margin right of auto. So if I pop this out into a new window, you can see that my painting is perfectly centered in the page. Now, how did that happen? Anyone know? So what does the margin auto do? That's right. It'll specify an automatic margin on the left and an automatic margin on the right so that we don't have to give it its own margins. And if you were to inspect element by clicking command click and then choosing inspect, if we look at this right here and we select this little div, you'll see this div painting has all of this space on the right and left. So if you scroll down all the way to the bottom, you'll see that it gives it a margin on its own of 512 on both sides. That spacing on the right and left is what perfectly centers this div in the middle of the page. It also pushes it 30 pixels from the top. So we can use margins of auto to center things if they have a specific width and it doesn't take up the whole screen. Just a really good thing to note. Now only certain elements can do this, and we'll talk about that more in a future video. But we also have one more thing here that we're just starting to look at. And this one's kind of new, but it's one of the most fun things to play with. This is box shadow. So what does box shadow do? Yeah, it gives it a shadow. It makes it appear slightly elevated off of the page. So you can see that elevation right here. The little shadow makes it appear as if the painting were slightly elevated off of the page. It's a cool thing that, if overused, looks nasty, but if you use it right, it can add some great styles to your page. Now, I recommend, if you want to know how these work, just literally type in box shadow CSS into Google. Excuse me, box. And the first one that pops up should be a little W3 Schools example of how to use a box shadow. And it's funny because it's almost exactly the same one as we see being used here in this Google Mondrian project. So play around with these different pixel sizes for the shadow and see how it changes. If we change this to 100, obviously the shadow gets too big for its own good. If we change it to 0, we see that there's now no shadow on the right and left. You can play around with this to try and get whatever feel you want, but we'll talk more explicitly about how box shadow works later on. So honestly, that should do it for now with this video. We're perfectly set up. We're ready to get started. This is what our Mondrian project looks like as of right now. Just a canvas hanging on a wall. Let's start with the painting in the next video.